So those are some of the problems that are within the school system. What about the history of the school itself? Does that cause an effect? Well, yeah, pretty much. If you've ever heard of a gentleman by the name of Sir Ken Robinson, he talks about this a lot in his various talks, including TED Talks and a talk for the RSA. Basically, the history of school does play a huge part into this, because the school system tends to be stuck in an industrialized / Enlightenment era model of education value. Basically, your two pillars of education when you have industrialization, Enlightenment era model of education, is going to be economics, and the other pillar is going to be intelligence. Views of intelligence may have changed, but economics haven't, and the mindsets are still there. We tend to stigmatize mistakes. And when we stigmatize mistakes, that means that mistakes are the worst things that you can make. When you stigmatize mistakes so that they're seen as the worst things you can make, you really start to become afraid of them. And my conclusion to all this is that we have become terrified as a society of being wrong. Why? Why are we so afraid of being wrong? We're afraid of being labeled as stupid, afraid of asking a stupid question, afraid of being wrong on tests and grades dropping, afraid of failing grades because grades are associated with being successful and no one wants to be seen as a failure. I mean, how many of us had this drilled into our heads when we were in the school system growing up? If you fail, you spend eternity flipping burgers at McDonald's. First and foremost, that's a little bit of a terrible view of seeing McDonald's employees or any fast food employees as being failures at life. That's not necessarily the case. In some cases, this mindset, it's understandable. Like, for example, a doctor or a nurse who makes mistakes could end up harming or killing their patients. An engineer who makes mistakes could have his bridge collapse, harming or killing others and causing property damage. An aircraft control room attendant who makes a mistake could cause an airplane crash. There is a time and a place for this type of mindset, where fear for mistakes is justified. But it doesn't necessarily have to be for all fields, and certainly not for science. Why? Because there's one big problem that's caused by all this. As Ken Robinson quotes, "If you're not prepared to be wrong, you'll never come up with anything original." The scientific inquiry thrives on asking questions, as Miss Frizzle eloquently put it, taking chances, making mistakes, and getting messy. But if these things are feared by society at large, then it becomes very difficult, if not impossible, to have an environment where scientific inquiry can flourish. I even noticed this happening to me as a homeschooler, though to a much lesser extent than my public school educated peers. Like, I wasn't afraid necessarily to ask questions, but I was more afraid of being wrong and being seen as being less than for being wrong about something. With all that being said, are there any possible solutions to this problem? Is there anything that can be done to kind of encourage scientific inquiry more in the high school biology classroom, or any high school science classroom for that matter? Can it even be done? Well, there's a couple of possible solutions for this. First is that we might try running our science classrooms not so much on fact cramming and information gathering, but more on student-generated scientific inquiry. Student-generated scientific inquiry is based around the ideas of Dewey, and that is very constructivist. The students are in control of their own learning, and that they're the ones who come up with the questions, the scientific questions that they want to know the answers to, and then they, with the teacher's assistance, are able to find the answers to those questions through using various scientific methods, and it could be anything from an experiment to surveys to just about anything you could think about. Basically, it's very constructivist in that it's aimed at students' own interests and gives them skills that they could use in the real world. Some people might argue that this can't be done, that it's not possible to have a student-based scientific inquiry classroom at higher levels of science, like beyond elementary education. But really, I don't believe that it's actually ever been done before, so it would just be a matter of finding a class that's willing and testing it to see if it's feasible, to see how well the students learn the material and how well the students learn about scientific inquiry through these methods. After all, what would be more constructivist than to have the students do science as the scientists do? To solve the issues of teachers not knowing anything or knowing very little about scientific inquiry, I would get teachers to have some practical experience in scientific inquiry so that they at least understand what it is and what it looks like. Salter and Atkins actually did a very interesting experiment around this by designing a undergraduate course that's actually focused around scientific inquiry, but instead of just teaching the theory of it, they actually had the students do scientific inquiry, and by that they had to think of a scientific question, and then they had to design either experiment or some other scientific method of finding an answer to that question, doing science as the scientists do, basically. And their review of it was that it went over very well. It went very positively, and a lot of the teachers said that this changed their mind about scientific inquiry and how they would implement it into the classrooms. One of the other things that I would do is that I would lessen emphasis on the diplomas so that less preparation time is needed for diploma exams. Right now, the diploma exams stand at 50% value for the entire course, which is actually kind of ridiculous because not even college classes have final exams that are worth that much. Good news is that as of me speaking this, on November 18th, 2014, the Alberta School Board had voted to lower the value of the high school diplomas from 50% to 30%. And that makes things much better for us teachers who are planning out unit plans and other things so that we can now devote more time to studying based on scientific inquiry rather than preparing for final examinations. It's a wonderful thing. Finally, it's a good idea for teachers to keep this in mind when they're planning out their courses for the year. It's this quote by Letterman and Antic, 2013. The nature of science and scientific inquiry are just as much science content as the reactions of photosynthesis or pH. So, scientific inquiry and the nature of science is just as important a topic to teach as the basic facts of science. As for societal solutions, ultimately, we do have less power to cause effect here, but there are some things we could do. First off, lead by example. There are no stupid questions. Be patient. Let your students know that your classroom is a safe environment. They're allowed to make mistakes here. They're allowed to get messy. They're allowed to take chances. Let them know that this is a safe environment where they can do that. Secondly, try to let there be as much student-based inquiry as much as currently reasonable with the program of studies that you're currently using. Thirdly, bring back the science fair. Encourage students to think outside the box. Experimental science is not the be-all to end-all, and make sure to emphasize that, because that's important, and people tend to forget that. Never, ever, ever, ever label a student as stupid. They are all smart in their own way. They all have their own forms of intelligence, even if we don't necessarily understand it. That's to our detriment, not theirs. Finally, don't give up. Remember, penicillin, Teflon, vulcanized rubber, and Coca-Cola were all results of mistakes or getting it wrong. Not all mistakes are the worst things ever. Mistakes can be good. We can learn from them. And mistakes can even create something wonderful. You don't have to fear them. Thank you for listening.